Good evening. I want to welcome you to Trinity Episcopal Church. I just want to say two things about Trinity Episcopal Church. Our mission statement here is to be an intentional Christian community, multicultural Christian community of reconciliation, transformation, and love. That's what we're about. We have a number of ministries, but one of our signature ministries, which you may have seen when you've come in with the gardens, is called Bread and Roses. And the mission of Bread and Roses is to transform the way we acquire, cook, and relate to the food that we eat. And that's part of the demonstration gardens that we have out back and a brand new kitchen to do that. So that's a little bit about who we are. I want to recognize any elected officials that are present. I know we have at least one person from City Council. Anybody else? Okay. I want to give a shout out to Virginia Organizing for helping with many of the logistical details of this. A number of their volunteers helped with just about everything we needed help with. This is just like Easter all over again. And now I want to introduce Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. I just, when I found out he was going to come here, I did a little bit of research, and just really one thing stood out to me. And the person that's here this evening is the same person that began this work decades and decades ago. He's been fighting for the same thing. He's a person of integrity, and so I introduce to you Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, the ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee.
Pastor Caspelli, thank you very much for allowing us to use this beautiful, beautiful facility. My apologies to all of the people outside who can't get in, and there were many, and later on we have the overflow room, which is overflowing, and we will get a microphone down there later, and people will be able to ask questions in that room. I also want to thank Joe Sakos and Virginia Organizing for helping to put this event on. And I want to thank our panelists. What we do in Vermont, and I've done hundreds of meetings just like this in Vermont, what we do is bring people up to reflect on their lives, which often have the same problems that millions of other people in our country do. And what we're doing tonight, by the way, is something very, very radical. You know what we're doing? We're practicing democracy. Very radical act. And Pastor, you'll forgive me for taking this radical concept to the church here. But what we want to do is what we should be doing all over this country, is talking in a civil way about the problems facing our nation, talking about how we solve those problems and how we go forward together. And I've always thought that it's important to hear from local people and what they are experiencing. So we're very proud tonight to have three panelists who are going to briefly talk a little bit about their lives and what they are up against. We're going to begin with, I believe, Del Irwin. Is Del here? Okay, and Del is retired and active in a variety of church and civic groups in the community. And she is going to be talking about what the Budget Act that was just passed last week will mean to her life and the lives of members of her families. Del, please come on up.
I am appalled by the recent Senate budget resolution that proposes egregious cuts that will hurt the poor and middle class. Cuts like completely eliminating the Affordable Care Act. This act helps millions like me and my family. It makes it illegal for insurance companies to charge more for or refuse to cover pre-existing conditions. Our grandson Tucker, at the age of 5, had to have his heart reconstructed surgically for a congenital defect. Before, that pre-existing condition would have followed him all his life. My daughter-in-law could not consider changing her expensive insurance because of her pre-existing condition, a short depression that happened decades ago and never recurred. Our son, a small business owner, can get help to offer health insurance to his employees. One son and his family can get preventive health care that they could not afford before. Some 17 preventive services are free. Our 2 college grandchildren can stay on their parents' insurance until age 26. When I had cancer, my $600 a month meds had me in the donut hole, that gap in Medicare coverage where the insured pays all prescription costs. Since 2010, that donut hole has been shrinking, helping millions of people like me, people who could not afford their meds without this benefit. The gap will be gone by 2020. Cuts to Medicaid are unconscionable. My hardworking mother, who worked all her life at low-paying jobs, spent her last year comfortable in a nursing home paid for by Medicaid, like millions of seniors. Our mentally ill son, hospitalized for a year, will desperately need Medicaid and affordable housing upon release. These budget cuts hurt millions of hardworking people, mentally ill, elderly, poor, middle class, not lazy people looking for a government handout. Our country cannot be truly great unless it is truly good. This budget is truly bad. It is immoral. Can you come help me sit down?
Well, I think I should quit now. I can't say anything beyond what Dell said. Our next panelist is Tamara Wright, who is a Charlottesville native who lives in Friendship Court and is working on her degree in police science at Piedmont, Virginia Community College. She's the mother of 3, including an autistic son. Tamara is active in the Urban Agricultural Collective of Charlottesville, and her family will be affected by many of the cuts that are proposed in the Senate budget resolution. Tamara?
As an individual whose household uses several of the programs which will receive cuts based on the new budget plan, I would like for you all to see how these cuts would affect my home as well as many other homes in my community. This is my son, Jace. Jace is autistic. Jace also suffers with both a mood and an emotional disorder. Jace goes to a private school because our local schools were not able to handle him and handle his behaviors that were a manifestation of his disability. When these budget cuts come through, I don't know where my son will be placed. The next closest school that he could have possibly went to is in Stanton, Virginia, and he would have to be bused back and forth from that school every day. Jace is a wonderful child. He flourishes and he can be successful, but I definitely need this educational support in order for him to be a great part of our economy, because it's definitely within him. I also have another child who suffers with language comprehension disorder. He uses manipulatives in school, so if those things are no longer there for him, being able to taking tests with SOLs, and all of those things are going to be a serious hindrance to him. I would hate to have to see any of these things be taken from us, because it's not going to give my children, as well as many other children, a fair chance. I can't do this alone. I just don't have the capacity to do it. But with the assistance, then we can continue on, they can continue on. I'm currently using Pell Grants to finish school. I've graduated from the criminal justice program, and I'm planning to graduate with my degree in police science. So this would definitely hurt a lot of us in a great way. So I'm hoping that listening to us and hearing the effects can change some of this. Thank you.
Tamara, thank you very much. Ziana Bryant is a student at Budford Middle School, where she is president of the Student Council. She is a member of the City of Promise Youth Council and also on the City of Charlottesville Youth Council. And she is an avid softball player who is missing a game tonight to be with us. And she is going to address some challenges that she and her family will face if the current budget resolution is implemented into law. Ziana?
I want to speak about education. I am very adamant about quality education, especially in public schools. We all know that knowledge is the key to success and essentially the key to a successful economy. In order to have a strong economy here in the state of Virginia, schools must be at the top of our list of priorities. So here we are, faced with the biggest question: to cut or not to cut? Here's how I see it. For the past few years, Charlottesville City Schools has been struggling with budget shortfalls, resulting in staff being laid off and reduced funding for important educational programs. Currently, 54% of students who attend Charlottesville City Schools qualify for free or reduced lunch. That speaks volumes. That shows that over half of our students lack standard resources that the average K-12 student has. I plan to attend college in a few years, and I will need financial aid. With that being said, I don't want to pay for that for the rest of my life. I'm counting on Pell Grants to help me pay for my tuition. If we cut back on our education, we are setting more kids up to fail. The kids who are the most vulnerable will be hurt the most. Thank you.
Now I'm really nervous. It's very hard to follow these three panelists who have given us more wisdom than I often hear after a full day in the United States Senate. So, I think what you heard from our three panelists is reflected in the lives of millions and millions of people. And the most important issue, I think, that we have got to deal with as Americans is to understand that the time is long overdue where we had an honest and serious conversation as a people about what's going on in America. Because what these three people just said, millions of people are experiencing the same and more. So let's talk a little bit about what is going on in our country. In terms of economics, you'll all be shocked to know that you live in the wealthiest country in the history of the world. But Tamara doesn't know that, because that wealth does not come down to the public schools of Charlottesville, or to the schools in Vermont, or to working people throughout this country. So while we are the wealthiest people in the history of the world, the simple truth and reality is that a great part of that wealth rests in the hands of a very, very few people. So today in America, we have a situation where 99% of all new income is going to the top 1%. What do you think about that? 99%. So all over our country, in Virginia and Vermont, all over states that even don't have V to begin with, people are working longer hours for low wages. In my state, this is true. It's not uncommon for people to be working 2 jobs or 3 jobs or sometimes even 4 jobs just to cobble together some income and some health care. That's the reality. 99% of all new income going to the top 1%. And then in terms of wealth, which is what we accumulate in our lifetime, what you have today is the top 1/10 of 1% owning almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Got that? 1/10 of 1% owning almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. You have, in the last 2 years alone, 14 individuals, the wealthiest 14 people in America, their wealth increased by $157 billion for 14 people. That is more wealth than is owned by the bottom 130 million Americans. You got one family in this country today, the Walton family, that owns Walmart. They themselves, one family, owns more wealth than the bottom 42% of the American people. Now that's what you got in terms of wealth. Now, from a financial and economic point of view, I think that that is unsustainable. I think that that is immoral. When you have a situation where so few have so much, and yet we have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. Are we satisfied morally living in a country where we see a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires, and almost 20% of our kids are living in poverty, and where hunger exists all over this country? In my state, there are people working 40 hours a week, but their wages are so low, they have to go to an emergency food shelf. I suspect that is not different here. Right? Okay. So that's what you got in terms of distribution of wealth and income. Now that's an economic issue. How does it become a political issue? And this is a very profound and important issue. 4 years ago or so, the United States Supreme Court ruled on a decision called Citizens United. You all know what that is? Yes. And essentially what Citizens United decision said to the very wealthiest people in this country, multi-billionaires, they said, okay guys, you own much of the American economy, but now we're going to give you an opportunity to own the United States government. Simple. So everybody in this room, if you're over 18, has one vote. And the Koch brothers and other billionaires, they also have one vote. But on top of that, they can spend $1 billion in the coming election cycle to elect the candidates of their choice. Now, some people think that that is freedom of speech. I do not believe that buying politicians and buying elections is freedom of speech. I think that is moving us to an oligarchic form of society. And unless we get a handle on that issue, none of the other issues that we're going to discuss today, education, healthcare, climate change, are going to be adequately addressed, because when these billionaires own the politicians, what the politicians will do is worry about tax breaks for billionaires and free trade agreements which allow them to move to China and throw American workers out on the street. They're not going to be worrying about the needs of American workers. That's why that whole issue of campaign finance, Citizens United, is so important. And in my view, not only do we need a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United, but we need to move to public funding of elections. Now, what else is going on in the economy? When you pick up the newspapers, every month they give you the unemployment rate. And they say, well, now unemployment, the official unemployment rate is about 5.5%. That's one way of looking at unemployment. There's another government way of looking at unemployment, which says that if you look at people who have given up looking for work, people in high unemployment areas, and if you look at people who are working part-time, and there are millions of them who want to work full-time, real unemployment in this country is 11%, not 5.5%. And then, if you look at another issue that nobody, Pope Francis is one of the few people who talks about that. Youth unemployment is 17%. And African American youth unemployment is literally off the charts, certainly over 25%. Okay? So out there, you have an economy which clearly is better than it was 6.5 years ago, but we have a major, major, major unemployment problem. Today in America, we have tens of millions of people all over this country who are working longer hours for lower wages. Now, if you stop for a moment and you say, what's going on in America? Everybody knows the advent of technology. We have all kinds of major technological breakthroughs which make every worker in America more productive. So my simple question to you is, and I want you to think about it, If every worker in America is more productive, how come those people are working longer hours for lower wages? And that is an issue that we need to discuss. Now, on top of that, let me touch on another issue that is hardly ever discussed, although has recently gotten some attention because of the tragedy in Baltimore over the last several weeks. And that is, right now in America, we have some 45 million people living in poverty. That is almost the highest number in the modern history of America. And, as Del mentioned, the Affordable Care Act, which I voted for, has been a success. But let's not kid ourselves. Despite the successes of the Affordable Care Act, 35 million Americans today have still no health insurance. And maybe even more significantly, you got millions more who do have insurance, but they are really poor policies with high deductibles and high copayments. Sound familiar? So you have, if you get hit by a bus, you'll get some coverage. But there are millions of people today who have insurance, but who hesitate to go to the doctor because they can't afford that deductible. Am I right? All right. Then what you have is another situation in terms of working people. Let me throw out a few facts. Since 1999, the family right in the middle of the American economy has seen its income go down by almost $5,000 after adjusting for inflation. Incredibly, that family earned less income last year than it did 25 years ago. How does that happen? People are working hard, and yet the families have less income. Let me give you some other facts here, which I think are interesting. You turn on the TV and you see a lot of these angry guys, right? Well, you know why they're angry? The median male worker, that man right in the middle of the American economy today, made $783 less last year than he did 41 years ago, adjusting for inflation. Got it? People are working hard and they're falling further and further behind. Women earned $1,300 less last year than they did in 2007. In other words, the working people of this country are on the move. Problem is, we're moving in the wrong direction. Now, let me mention to you about an issue which is very relevant to why the middle class of this country is declining. And it has to do with a very non-sexy issue called trade. All right? Trade. What's that about? Since 2001 in this country, we have lost almost 60,000 factories and millions of good-paying jobs. The younger people don't know it, so let me tell the young people. There was once a time in this country, Tamara, where you can go to a store and you know what? You bought a product and guess where it was made? Not in China, not in Vietnam, but in the United States of America. I know that's hard to believe, but actually that is true. But we have had trade policies pushed by corporate America and by leaders of both the Democratic and the Republican Party, which in essence have said the following: corporate America, we're now going to give you the opportunity to move to very low-wage countries all over the world. You can hire people in those countries for pennies an hour. The minimum wage in Vietnam is about 56 cents an hour, and you bring your products back into this country. Now, all of us, I know, want to see poor people around the world do better. We all do. But there are ways that we can do that without engaging in a race to the bottom in this country. Our job is to uplift the poor people around the world, not sink the working people of this country. I voted as a member of Congress against NAFTA, against CAFTA, against permanent normal trade relations with China, because these were all trade agreements that were pushed by corporate America and the big money interest. And I intend to play an active role in defeating the Trans-Pacific Partnership as well. Now, tonight, when you go home and you turn on the TV, you're going to see all of these companies telling us, buy this product, buy my car, buy my pair of sneakers, buy this, buy that. And I think what we have to say to corporate America is, if you want us to buy your products, how about manufacturing those products in Virginia, in Vermont, and in the United States of America? Let me say a word. Tamara talked about education, and she raised some very important issues, and let me say a word about this. Here's the facts. 30 years ago, the United States of America led the world in terms of the percentage of our people who graduated college. We were number one. Does anyone know where we are today? We're in 12th place. And the reason for that, to a significant degree, is that the cost of college has gone up, family income has gone down, and you got a whole lot of folks who A, can't afford to go to college, B, who are dropping out of college for financial reasons. And then on top of all of that, if somebody manages to get through college, they leave school very deeply in debt. In Vermont, I think the average debt is about $28,000, $29,000. I talked to a young woman last year, and her dream was to go to medical school, which she did. She graduated, and she's practicing primary health care with low-income people, which is a huge need in this country. We need thousands of doctors to do just that. You know what she came out of medical school in debt? $300,000. That was a crime for wanting to become a doctor. I talked to dentists, and we have a huge dental crisis in this country in terms of access to affordable dental care. Dentists are coming out of school $250,000 in debt. So you have a situation where, to make it in the middle class today, to a significant degree, you need higher education, and yet we are making it harder and harder for people to get that education, and when they get out, they leave school deeply in debt. Now, how many of you know how much it costs to go to college in Germany or in Denmark? Anyone know? Zero. All right, we've got a smart audience here. The answer is zero, and I think in Denmark they actually pay you to go to college. How's that? All right. Now, what those countries are doing is smart. They are investing in their young people. They are making certain that they capitalize on the intellects and the energy of their young people so that they can be competitive in the global economy and so that they can have strong democracies. I happen to believe, and I know I get criticized for this quite often, but I think maybe we can learn something from other countries who are providing. All right. So I gather I'm not alone on that. So if Germany and other countries are smart enough to say that college tuition should be free, I believe, and we'll introduce legislation to make this happen, that in public colleges and universities in this country, tuition will be free. When we talk about the economy, and I think Del made this very good point, in a sense, you judge a nation not by the number of billionaires it has, by the number of nuclear weapons it has, but in a sense, by how it treats its most vulnerable people. And I have to admit that we do not do a very good job at that, or a very humane job at that. For the last number of years, there has been an effort in the Congress, well-funded by multi-Wall Street billionaires who want to cut Social Security. They want to cut Medicare and they want to cut Medicaid, and I'm going to talk about all that stuff in a minute. And we have fought back, and so far we have prevented them from making cuts to Social Security. But when you have, as we do in this country, millions of seniors, millions of people with disabilities, people who are just hanging on with $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 a year, a humane country, a just country, does not cut those benefits. In fact, what we do is expand those benefits, and that's what we're going to try to do. Now, I've talked a little bit about some of the problems that I perceive, and I think you probably have thoughts about other problems that I didn't discuss. And let me just mention one last one, and that is obviously the planetary crisis of climate change. I think we can't have a discussion without mentioning that. And I don't mean to be terribly partisan. Well, yes, I do. All right, I will be very, that's why I'm here, actually, to say that, look, honest people in a democracy have different points of view. And, you know, my wife disagrees with me on issues, and I'm sure everybody in this room will have disagreements, but it becomes an embarrassment, and I speak as somebody who was on the Senate Environmental Committee and the Senate Energy Committee, when you have a major political party in this country literally rejecting what the overwhelming majority of scientists are saying on climate change. It is an embarrassment. It is a danger. All right, we can disagree about this, so we can disagree about that. But if you don't believe in science, it is very, very hard to go forward as a nation. So here's what the scientists tell us. It's not a debate. The only place that remains a debate is on Fox television. Excluding that, it is not a debate. And what the scientific community tells us very loudly and clearly, climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is already causing devastating problems. Take a look at what's going on in California. And we have a very small opportunity, a very small few years in which to transform our energy system. Or if we do not, what the scientists are telling us is that by the end of this century, when your kids and your grandchildren are around, this planet may be 5 to 10 degrees warmer than it is today. And think what that does to our oceans, what it means to water supply, what it means to drought, what it means to floods, what it means to extreme weather disturbances. So we have a window of opportunity, not many years left, to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel and into sustainable energy and into energy efficiency. And when we do that, we can make sure that our kids and grandchildren have a planet to live on which is habitable. So that's an important issue. Now, let me suggest to you what I think should be done, and I'll tell you what the Republicans are doing, because it is really quite amazing. And again, I don't mean to be, I'm the longest serving independent in the history of the United States Congress. I don't go out of my way, I really don't. I've never run a negative ad. I don't think it's a good idea to be beating up on people all over the place. Americans don't want to hear that. But on the other hand, people have got to hear the truth about what's going on. So I'm going to tell you what I think we need to do, and I'm going to tell you what the Republicans are proposing. And needless to say, they are diametrically opposed to each other, two very different concepts. All right. If unemployment is really at 11%, what should we be doing? We should be creating millions of jobs, right? Okay. Well, in my state of Vermont, and I suspect in Virginia, we have serious infrastructural problems. What do I mean by that? Roads that are in disrepair, bridges that occasionally collapse, water systems that have pipes which are 100 years old and leak all the time, wastewater plants which are inadequate. We have a rail system in America today which is way behind Europe, Japan, and even China in some degrees, all right? We have airports which are antiquated. We need to invest, according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. It's a very boring name, but these guys actually do very important work analyzing our infrastructural needs. They say we have to invest over $3 trillion in our infrastructure. I have been conservative and introduced legislation that would invest $1 trillion over a 5-year period to rebuild our infrastructure. And when we do that, we can create and sustain 13 million decent-paying jobs. And I want you to think about what an America looks like when all over this country we have people who are making us more efficient, rebuilding our bridges and our roads and rail and all that stuff, making this country more productive, more efficient, and safer. And that's a vision I think we have got to maintain. It is beyond comprehension. I speak as a former mayor, as mayor of Burlington, Vermont for 8 years, and I know a little bit about infrastructure. Infrastructure does not get better if you ignore it. It's like a cavity in your mouth, you know? You may want to ignore it. It ain't going to get better. So we may as well now start investing and putting our people back to work. Now, what else do we have to do in terms of the economy? Well, right now, the federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Think about trying to live on $7.25 an hour. I remember being in Detroit, Michigan, a couple of years ago, talking to some young people who were working not in one job in a fast food place at $7.25, in one case in 3 jobs, taking a bus to get to a different place. The answer is you can't make it on $7.25 an hour. That's a starvation wage. We've got to raise the minimum wage to a living wage, which to my mind means $15 an hour over the next several years. And when people are earning, one of the economic realities of life is that when somebody is earning money, they are out spending money. And one of the economic crises that we face is you've got millions of people who have no money to spend. They're not going to restaurants, they're not buying goods, they're not buying services. And when you put money into the hands of working people and they spend that, they create jobs. Now, the other thing we have got to do, in addition to raising the minimum wage, is we need pay equity for women workers. Okay, women are now making approximately 78 cents an hour compared to what a man makes for the same job, and that is not defensible. And by the way, when you do that, and you put that additional money into the hands of working women, you go a long way to eliminating a lot of poverty in this country. Another issue that doesn't get much attention, but is a very, very important issue, deals with overtime. When I was growing up, when people worked more than 40 hours a week, the expectation was that they were getting time and a half for the work they were doing. Today, most workers do not get time and a half because the Fair Labor Standards Act has not kept up with inflation over the years. So today you have people working in Burger King or McDonald's who are so-called supervisors, making $25,000, $26,000 a year, working 50, 60 hours a week. They do not get overtime. Now, we have worked very hard with President Obama and his administration. I hope and expect that in the very near future you're going to see a new threshold up to maybe mid-50s, $55,000. Everybody underneath that who's working more than 40 hours a week will get time and a half, and that will be a major step forward for working people in this country. We have also, at the end of the day, have to rebuild trade unions in America. When workers stand together and they negotiate decent contracts, it not only improves their lives, it raises wages for all workers. And right now, for many workers throughout this country, it is very, very hard to form a union. There's a lot of opposition. Employers make it very difficult, and we've got to deal with that through legislation. And I mentioned a moment ago trade, which is a very important issue. When we talk about the needs of working families, I would like everybody in this room to understand that there is one country in the industrialized world, one major country alone, that does not guarantee health care to all people. What country is that? You all know? You're in it, all right? So we talk about the benefits gained by the Affordable Care Act. We talk about the problems that remain. But the truth of the matter is I live 100 miles away from Canada. That's where I live. And I've been all over the world. There is no major country on earth that does not say health care is a right not a privilege. We have got to join the rest of those countries. You know, I remember every year I got a group of young people, college students from the UK, come to my office. And one year I said, show me your card. I'd like to see your national health care card. They said, oh, we don't have a card. You just go to the doctor, you tell them your name, and you do it. In other words, we have a system today that is so complicated in America. It is so wasteful. It is so dysfunctional. We spend far more for prescription drugs than any other country. Do you know that? Far more. And many years ago, I had to take Vermonters over the Canadian border to buy. We went with the women who were dealing with breast cancer. I mean, really struggling. And they bought the drugs that they needed for 1/10 the price being paid here in the United States of America. So essentially, we need a healthcare system which is of high quality, which is cost effective, which takes on the drug companies and says to them, their goal is to provide good quality drugs for us, not to rip off American consumers. And in my view, the way we move forward is through a Medicare for all single-payer program. Now, some of what I've talked about is going to cost a lot of money. The truth is, if we make tuition free in public colleges and universities, it's a fairly expensive proposition. So how do we do that? Well, I think the first thing that we do is to tell the large multinational corporations that they're going to have to rejoin the United States of America, and they're going to have to start paying their fair share of taxes. Right now, we have a number of extremely profitable corporations who at the end of a given year pay less in federal taxes than you do, because they stash their profits in the Cayman Islands and in Bermuda and in other tax havens throughout the world. They pay nothing in taxes, or very little. So I think we're going to ask them to rejoin America and start paying their fair share, and then we're going to look at individual tax rates. What we have seen, as I mentioned earlier, over the last 20, 25 years, is a huge transfer of wealth from the middle class and working families to the top, not even 1%, top 1/10 of 1%. You know, my Republican friends, they get very nervous when you talk about redistribution of wealth. They really start twitching, you know. But that is exactly what has happened over the last 25 years. We're talking about many trillions of dollars. The slice of the pie that the middle class has gotten has gone smaller and smaller. All of that is going to the top 1/10 of 1%, the top 1%. And given that reality, we're going to have to deal with individual tax rates as well. Right now, on Wall Street, you got these hedge fund managers who make tens of millions a year, and yet their effective real tax rate is lower than many of yours. And that is not sustainable. That has got to change. All right, let me say a few words now about this Republican budget, which passed last week. This is what it does. And it is, you know, when I tell you these things, you think, well, he's exaggerating, he's not telling you the truth. I am telling you the truth. This is what this budget does. At a time when we have 35 million Americans who already have no health insurance today, this budget ends, as you heard, the Affordable Care Act. That means you are throwing 16 million Americans off of health insurance. So they're gone. They had it, now they lost it. On top of that, because they're cutting Medicaid by well over $400 billion, 11 million more people who are on Medicaid will lose their health insurance. 16 plus 11 equals 27 million people thrown off of health insurance through the Republican budget. The Republican budget makes massive cuts in Medicare over a 10-year period by over $400 billion, and that obviously will have negative impacts on our seniors. It would also end Medicare as we know it by turning it into a voucher program. You know what that means? What the Republican idea is to say, because they like private insurance health care and they don't like public health insurance, what they will say to seniors is, here is a check. We're not quite sure how much. It was $7,000, $8,000, we don't know exactly. Here's a check for $8,000. You're 80 years of age and you're dealing with cancer. Here is a check for $8,000, and you can go out to any private insurance company you want and get the best deal you can. Well, you tell me when you're 80 years of age and you're dealing with cancer, what kind of deal you're going to get. And that is basically their plan for the future of Medicare. The Republican budget, as we heard earlier, would increase prescription drug prices for more than 9 million seniors and persons with disabilities who are in Medicare Part D by reopening the donut hole. We're trying to close it, and they want to open it. The Republican budget, at a time when, as we heard tonight, millions of young people and others are trying to be able to go to college and having a hard time doing that, the Republican budget would cut Pell Grants by $85 billion over a 10-year period, making it harder for 8 million young Americans and their families to afford the cost of college. Psychologists will tell you that the most important years of a human being's life are 0 to 4. That's when the intellect develops, that's when one's emotions develop. Republican budget would eliminate Head Start services for 400,000 children over the next decade. Now here we have, I know in Vermont that I suspect here, tell me if I'm wrong, but there is a real crisis in Vermont in terms of affordable quality childcare. Is that true here? Okay, all right. So parents who go to work want to make sure that their kids are in a place where the quality is good and safe so they can go to work and focus on their work. Right now, that is very, very hard to do in America. Head Start is one of the important programs protecting lower-income people. Republicans want to make massive cuts. You know, when you live in a civilized democratic society, it seems to me you just cannot turn your back on people who are struggling and who are hungry. And in America today, rather tragically, there are people today in my state, in your state, all over this country, who are worried about how they're going to put food on the table for their kids tomorrow. The Republican budget makes massive cuts in the food stamp program, in the WIC program, Women, Infant, and Children program, which is a program designed to provide good nutrition for pregnant women and their children. Cut that, and cut other nutrition programs. So at a time when our goal should be to eliminate hunger in America, the Republican budget makes hunger even worse. And now, maybe to add insult to injury, let me tell you what another aspect of this budget, and this is all true. We have massive income and wealth inequality in America. Wealthiest people are doing phenomenally well. What the Republicans did is to do away entirely with the estate tax, which applies only to the top 0.2%. 99.8% of families do not pay a nickel in the estate tax. Only the top 0.2%, approximately 5,000 families in the United States of America. And the Republicans' analysis of our problems is that we need to give them a $269 billion tax break over the next 10 years. Okay. And then, not to, to make things even worse, what they said is, some years ago, we voted to expand benefits for the children's tax credit and the earned income tax credit, which applies to low and moderate income families. We expanded benefits. They are going to allow those expanded benefits to expire, raising taxes, in essence, for low and moderate income families at the same time as they give huge tax breaks to the billionaire class. That is what the Republican budget is about. So, where do we go from here? The answer is that I say to you, sadly but truthfully, what you already know, is that to a very large degree, the United States Congress is controlled by large campaign donors, people who have huge sums of money, and their lobbyists. The only way we win this thing is when millions of people come together and say, enough is enough. And I want to leave, my wife always tells me I depress people thoroughly and that I got to hand out tranquilizers and suicide prevention packs and everything. But let me conclude in this way. because there's a lot of good news that has gone on in America in the last few years. If we were sitting in this room 20 years ago, and somebody said, you know, I think the United States of America is going to be mature enough to outgrow its racist history and elect an African American to be president of the United States. If we were in this room 20, 25 years ago, very few people would have believed that. That happened, and we should be proud of that. And we should be proud as Americans that that happened. You know, you can like Obama, you can dislike Obama, but the color of his skin should not be the issue. Just think about if we were here 30, 40 years ago. There would have been 1 or 2 women in the United States Senate. And what you're seeing right now is not only women in the Senate, women in the House, women governors and all that. You're seeing a huge transformation of work. You know, young people don't know that women did not used to be plumbers and carpenters and police officers and in the military. That's just the last 30, 40 years, all of that happened. So we have gone a long way. Do we still have a long way to go to combat sexism? We sure do. But we should be proud of what we have done in making sure that women are not second-class citizens. We should be proud of that. In terms of gay rights, the transformation has been extraordinary. Very few people would have believed that in conservative states in the year 2015, legislatures would be voting for gay marriage. Unthinkable. But the American people said, you know what? If people love each other, that's their business, it's not our business. Allow that to go forward. My point is that we as a nation have moved very aggressively in becoming a less discriminatory society, and we should be very, very, very proud of that. Where we still are not making progress, and in fact are losing, falling further behind, is in the economic struggle. There is no rational reason, there is no moral reason why so few should have so much and so many should have so little. There is no reason why so many should not have health care, not be able to go to college, why kids are hungry in America today. So I would hope very much that as a people, we get our act together, we stand together, and that we begin the process of reclaiming America from a handful of very, very wealthy people. And I say this in a church, these are very religious people. But you know what their religion is? Greed. All right, and that's not what America is supposed to be about. So let's work together. Let's transform our economic system. Let's transform our political system. We can do this. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, Billy, there's Billy in my office, and if you have a question, please raise your hand, stand up, and give us your name, and ask your question or make your comment. Okay. Okay, woman over there.
I live here in Charlottesville.
Yeah, hold that mic close to your mouth. Yeah.
I live here in Charlottesville, and I've been involved with Results for the last 20 years, which works on hunger and poverty issues around the world. And my question is, what can we do to push Congress to focus on tax fairness and inequality, including the racial wealth gap?
I think what we have to do is engage in what I call a political revolution. And what do I mean by that? I mean by seeing ourselves somewhat differently than we used to see ourselves. You are very powerful people when you stand together. So what can you do? You can invite your members of Congress here. You can invite your United States senators here. You can sit down and tell them what is on your mind. So when we're talking about tax unfairness, that is your issue, right? All right. It is huge. It is beyond comprehension that multi-billion-dollar corporations pay nothing in federal taxes. They have got to hear from you. They have got to know that you know what is going on. If they take you for granted and they think you don't know what's going on, they will do the bidding, by and large, of big money interests. So in whatever way that you can think of, through emails, through phone calls, through meetings, I'm here tonight, you can have other members, local, state people, federal people, you can bring them here. But you gotta be loud and you gotta be clear. It is not fair that people, Warren Buffett, you remember Warren Buffett? Warren Buffett made the point, he said, Warren Buffett is a multi-billionaire, one of the richest people in America. He said, it is absurd that my effective tax rate is lower than my secretary's, all right? So the answer is, like everything else, educate, organize, tell your elected officials you know what's going on and it's not acceptable. Okay.
Yes, good evening, Senator. My name is Trudy Obi. I'll be graduating from the University of Virginia this Saturday in politics. And I'm also, I'm going back to your issues on higher education because I also got into my master's program for public policy, and so I've been looking at the costs of education for that. And it's very, it's difficult to look at. So, and unfortunately Pell Grants are being cut by this budget. So I want to know exactly what do you plan to do to at least once again restore what the legislation that you're thinking about proposing to do?
Well, two things. Excellent question, and congratulations on graduating. Just tell you, in my own office, I have a couple of attorneys who are both $100,000 in debt. Okay, that's just not uncommon. I find it interesting that if you went out now and bought a new automobile, what would be the interest rate on that car? What would you get, 2%? Maybe if you got a deal, it would be lower than that. So how come we can get interest rates of 1 or 2% on an automobile, but you ain't going to get interest rates of 1 or 2% on your student loan? So we have to be talking about the ability to refinance and the ability to take advantage of the lowest possible interest rates, not the interest rates you're currently stuck with. Second point in that, it used to be, and the Obama people did the right thing, it used to be that these loans were administered by private banks who made a heck of a profit out of that. Right now it's administered by the federal government. But I do not believe that the federal government should be making billions of dollars in profit on student loans. All right, in a sense, they're making that profit off of low-income and working families. You do those two things, we can knock down the interest rates on student loans pretty significantly. We should look at that as well, yeah. Yes, the answer is.
Hi, my name's Sophie. Thank you so much for being here. This is the coolest moment of my life. My question for you, how do you think the government can encourage large companies to return production and jobs to the U.S. without seeing a huge jump in the cost of consumer products? Thank you.
I got the first half. Second half.
Yeah, how do you think we can encourage the companies to return production and jobs without seeing a huge jump in the cost of consumer products?
Okay, that's a good question. And one of the arguments for free trade is that, products made by desperate people abroad can be sold cheaply in the United States of America. Well, I have problems with that. I would suggest to you this, that if it is true that if products are made in the United States, prices might be somewhat higher. That's true. But you know what? People would be earning the wages to purchase those products. And I'd rather have a high-wage country, even if prices for consumer goods are higher, than a low-wage country living off of the products made by even poorer people abroad. Okay?
Senator, I'm so glad to have you here. I'm so pleased. My name is Philip. I'm from Augusta County. It's been my observation that the global climate change effect is driven singularly by our continued use of fossil fuel. I'm also convinced that the global oligarchy that's their single linchpin. That's what holds them in power. And I'm also aware of a history of over 100 years of the true technologies that we should have had 100 years ago being suppressed. And I'm not talking about solar, and I'm not talking about wind. And I know you probably are aware of what I'm speaking. People are killed for this, but I will speak it. I will speak it at risk of my life. Zero-point energy technology, I'm going to say that. If I die for this, it will have been worth it. Thank you, folks. Thank you so much.
Well, I don't think you're going to be killed for it, all right? Look, I think what you have is people make huge sums of money off of fossil fuel, and they want to maintain it. That's the simple reality. I mean, you don't have to, go to extreme degrees to ask the question why it is that the same car companies can make cars in China and other countries that get a lot more miles per gallon than they do in the United States of America. Why is that? You don't have to go to great lengths to ask why it is that our rail system is so antiquated, all right, which makes us much more dependent on trucks and cars than other countries. Okay? So in my mind, we have the technology. We know what we can do, and that technology will only grow to make us more energy efficient. For example, right now, just give you one example. I come from a cold weather state, and it costs a lot to heat. We've had some success in putting money into weatherizing people's homes. And you know what that means? We've reduced their fuel cost by 50%, their carbon emissions by 50%. We should be doing that all over America. Problem is, most people, many people don't have the $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 that they need to weatherize their homes. What about a government says we're going to lend you that money and you pay it back as you reduce your fuel costs? That is such an eminently sensible idea. Doesn't cost you anything. People repay it by lowering their fuel bills and they pay you the difference. So there is a lot that we can do. Now the good news is, as you know, in recent years we've seen a revolution in solar technology and wind. We are making progress, but we have a long way to go. All right, what I would suggest, Billy, maybe we should take some questions downstairs. We'll take one here. Just be loud, and Billy, you go downstairs, and somebody will try to survive without the mic. Ma'am?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming. You are a welcome breath of fresh air. Would you, Senator, consider promoting a carbon fee and dividend legislation as a bipartisan solution to climate change?
Well, let me answer you in this way. Senator Barbara Boxer and I of California did that. All right, you're too late. We did it. We introduced very comprehensive legislation. To ask that it be bipartisan is a little bit more than I can do. When you have a party that doesn't even acknowledge the reality of climate change, I don't think we're going to get too many of those guys to sign up for a carbon tax. But I should tell you, there are some Republicans out there, not in Congress, who do support that concept. All right, Billy downstairs, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Senator.
Wow, impressive. All right, you're coming through loud and clear. Do you have some questions down there?
Right here.
Hi, my name is Betsy, and I just want to know your view on lobbyists.
Question is my view on lobbying. What we have now is, it's very sad. I mean, most of you, I expect, do not have lobbyists making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year representing your interests, right? Is that a fair assumption? Maybe I'm off on this one, but I think it's probably true. But the number of lobbyists who come from Wall Street, who come from big energy, who come from the military-industrial complex. What happens is, you have generals and admirals, they leave the military service. A few years later, they're back as lobbyists or working for large corporations. It is a very serious problem. And what we need is certainly stronger legislation to end the revolving door policy. And we just cannot have corporate America using all of its wealth and power to influence legislation. So we need real lobbying reform. Another question down there, Billy?
Thank you. My question. I think almost all of us agree with all your policies. If you come this way. Oh, the one area that wasn't mentioned that I'm very curious about as a veteran myself is the continued growth of military presence all over the world, especially in areas that we try to dictate foreign governments to do what we want them to do, which end up involving conflicts that cost lives and injuries in the war machine in this country, it costs a fortune, which could be used to rebuild the infrastructure. And I'm interested in how you feel about foreign policy involvement of U.S. troops.
Good question. Excellent question. And thank you very much for your service to our country. As the former chairman of the Veterans Committee, I met so many wonderful and great veterans who have devoted their lives to defending our country. And by the way, you know, we have got to make sure that we can do everything that we can that they get the quality health care that they need, something that I've been working very hard on. In terms of foreign policy and wars, when I was first elected to the U.S. Congress back in '91, a long time ago, one of the first votes that I had to cast was on the first Gulf War. And I voted against that war. My wife said, she says, well, you're going to have a very short congressional life. You just ended your congressional career. But it turned out not to be the case. And in terms of the war in Iraq, I not only, let me spend a few minutes on this one. I had serious doubts about what Bush and Cheney were saying, and I had serious concerns about the kind of destabilization that would take place. And sadly, much of what I feared has in fact taken place. I not only, voted against that war, but I helped lead the opposition to it, and unfortunately, we were not successful in preventing it. Where we are right now is in a very difficult world, and I wish I could tell you otherwise, but as all of you know, there are terrorists out there who want to do us harm, and we have got to be vigilant in protecting this country against them. But what I will also tell you is that while some of my colleagues apparently have no idea of what the war in Afghanistan has meant, what the war in Iraq has meant, some of these guys seem to be itching for another war. And I fear very much that if we don't stand up, we could be in perpetual warfare in the Middle East. Now, do we want to see ISIS defeated? I certainly do, and I know that you do. But here, I think, is the main point. The United States and other Western countries should be very, very supportive. But at the end of the day, the only way, in my view, that the war against ISIS is won is when the Muslim countries stand up themselves and lead that fight. Most of you don't know this. Saudi Arabia has the third largest military budget in the world. Third largest. You have other countries in that region who are very, very wealthy. I think that there's a fight going on for what Islam is, the soul of Islam. I think these guys are going to have to get involved in that struggle. I think we can be supportive through the air and other ways. But I will absolutely do my best to make sure that we are not in perpetual warfare, spending billions of dollars every single year and seeing more and more of our young people coming home dead or wounded. So that's... Billy, maybe one last question down there, if you could.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm an undergrad at the University of Virginia. And kind of piggybacking off that veterans question, I was wondering, how do you propose to keep our veterans safe once they come home with mental illness and the whole issue of mental illness? Because as you probably know, suicide has killed more veterans here at home than the war has actually killed. So how do you propose to...
Thank you for asking that question, and I do know something about it because I was chairman of that committee. We have some 500,000 men and women who have come home from Iraq and Afghanistan dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. It is a huge problem. The problem not only impacts them, it impacts their spouses, it impacts their kids. So the first thing that we have got to make sure, and by the way, PTSD is a tough illness. No one has a magical cure for it. But the first thing that we have to do is make sure, and I work very hard on this, is that we have the psychologist, the psychiatrist, and the counselors, and the other medical people to take care of all of our veterans. When people put their lives on the line and they come home wounded, you do not turn your back on those people. There are... There are a number of therapies out there, and some of them are more successful than others. In some cases, the VA is doing a good job. In some cases, not such a good job. But let me just conclude on that question. When we talk about war, I am afraid that too many people do not know really what the cost of war is. And the cost of war in the case of Iraq and Afghanistan is not just 6,700 Americans who never came home alive. It is the 500,000 who came home with post-traumatic stress disorder or traumatic brain injury. It is those that I visited at Walter Reed who have lost their legs or their arms. So I would hope, and by the way, in terms of Iran, I support what the president is trying to do. What the president is trying to do is say, and I believe this, Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, but we can do that through negotiations rather than war. And it was appalling to me to see some 47 people literally in the Senate trying to sabotage that effort. So, look, it is a difficult world out there, and no one has a magical solution in terms of foreign policy, Middle East and so forth and so on. Complicated, it is difficult. But we have got to do everything that we can, not just to be dependent on tanks and guns and planes and war, but to go through every effort to try to create, no matter how difficult it is, a world of peace. Thank you all very much for being here tonight.